Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 8 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. This is one of the two verses in Anubandham, this verse and verse 10. Bhagavan first composed in Sanskrit and later translated in Tamil. So first I will talk about the Sanskrit version of this verse and then the Tamil version, because the Tamil version throws some light on the Sanskrit. This Sanskrit verse is considered generally to be a very important verse of Bhagavan's teachings, so much so that in the stone hall that was constructed for Bhagavan in front of his mother's temple, above the stone sofa that they carved for him, they carved in gold letters, or they carved and then painted in gold letters, this Sanskrit verse. But it is not actually the most important Sanskrit. It's not the most important verse composed by Bhagavan. But it is certainly a very interesting verse. And in Kavyagantha's Ramana Gita, he devotes a whole chapter to this verse. That is chapter 2. I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's called On the Three Paths, and it's about it's Kavyagantha's explanation of this verse. Not actually a correct explanation, but it's his explanation nevertheless. So I'll first read the verse, explain the meaning, and then I'll explain the context in which Bhagavan wrote this. The verse in Sanskrit, please forgive me if I'm not reading it quite correctly, because slightly dyslexic and my pronunciation of Sanskrit is probably not very good. But anyway, Hridaya guhara madhye kevalam brahma matram hyam aham iti sakshat atma rupena bhati shridi visha manasa swam chimvata majata va pavla chanana rodat atma nishto bhavatvam. What this means is the first two lines, Hridaya guhara madhye kevalam brahma matram aham iti sakshat atma rupena bhati. What that means is, in the center of the heart cave, solitarily, Brahman shines alone, clearly in the form of oneself as I am I. That is, Hridaya guhara means the heart cave. Madhye means in the center. So in the center of the heart cave. Kevalam, I believe, is here used as an adverb meaning solitarily, on its own. Brahman alone, Brahma matram is Brahman alone. Bhati is shines. Sakshat means Sakshat means openly, clearly, evidently, immediately, or directly. Shines atma rupena, in the form of oneself, aham iti, as I am I. So this is a very clear statement of Bhagavan's teachings, but what is called Brahman is nothing but that which is shining, always shining clearly in the center of the heart cave of all of us as I am I. What is the significance of this term, aham, or I am I? The reason Bhagavan often used this term is the reason is that what we actually are is nothing other than ourselves. But we now take ourselves to be something other than what we actually are, other than ourselves. We take ourselves to be this body consisting of 5 sheaths. So, as Bhagavan said, ego is nothing but the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. But what we actually are is not this false awareness, I am this body, but just the pure awareness, I am. So who am I? I am I. I'm nothing other than I. So I am I here signifies awareness of ourself as ourself alone. So that fundamental awareness I am, which is shining in the heart of all of us, that is Brahman, and it is aware of itself as itself alone, as I am I. So that is what we actually are. And then in the second half of the verse is a separate sentence. Hriddhi visa means entering the heart. Manasa means by the mind. Svam chimbata, swam chimbata majjata. Majjata means sinking. Chimbata here means investigating or attending to. Chimbata can mean it can mean attending, being attentive, thinking, or investigating. Swam means oneself or itself. So entering the heart by the mind, sinking, investigating itself. Sinking here, sometimes this majjata is translated as diving, but I think sinking is a more appropriate term than diving, because diving tends to suggest a more active process, whereas sinking is just suggests more of a subsidence, sinking. And sinking where? Sinking deep within. Sinking, that is when we sink deep enough within, we enter the heart. That's the idea. And how do we sink deep within? By the mind investigating itself. This is clearly Bhagavan's teachings. But then we come across the problem in this verse. Va means awe. Pavana chalana rodat. Pavana means pavana means wind, air, or in this context, breath. Chalana means movement, and rodat is an ablative or fifth case form of roda. Means literally means from restraining, but it in English we'd say by restraining. Often in Sanskrit the ablative is used where in English we would use by. Now, the ablative is often used in the sense of the instrumental case. That is, from restraining means as a result of restraining or by restraining. So so the mind entering the heart by the mind sinking deep, investigating itself, or by restraining the movement of the breath. Atmanishto bhavatvam, may you be fixed in yourself. Atma means oneself, yourself, myself, because it's an instruction to us. We have to take it as yourself. And nishta means to be fixed, or well, nishta means to be in or be fixed in or to remain as, but so it gives the idea of be fixed in yourself. Being fixed as oneself means remaining, implies remaining as we actually are, being as we actually are. How can we be as we actually are? Only by not rising as ego. So long as we rise as ego, though we are always ourselves, we seem to be something other than what we actually are when we rise as ego. So to be Atmanishta means the state in which we do not rise as ego. In other words, the state in which we remain as we always actually are. So the implication of this sentence is that there are two means to enter the heart. And the heart here means our real nature, what we actually are, the pure awareness I am. Entering that means subsiding back into that. When we subside into the heart, we thereby become established in Atmanishta. Yes, as I was saying, this sentence implies that is, entering the heart means subsiding back within, deep into the heart. So it's only by sinking within that we can enter the heart. And by entering the heart, since the heart is our real nature, we thereby remain fixed in ourselves. So āṇmā is the ultimate goal, to be as we actually are. That's our aim. And in order to be as we actually are, according to Bhagavan, the only means is investigating ourselves. But this sentence seems to imply that there are two ways to be fixed in ourselves. One is by the mind subsiding, investigating itself, or the other means is restraining the movement of the breath. So how did this idea come in here? But we can restrain the movement, but we can be fixed in ourselves. We can be as we actually are by restraining the breath, because vāha means or. So it implies that this is an alternative means. Vāha can also, in some contexts, means and. But that's not how it's usually. Vāha is used in the sense of or. So that's the obvious meaning of vāha. So how did this idea come to be in this verse? Why would Bhagavan write like that? There is a reason. That is, how Bhagavan came to write this verse is very significant. One day in 1915, a devotee called Jagadishwara Sastri tried to write a verse beginning with the words Hridaya Guhara Madhye. But he struggled to express his ideas in the form of a verse. He couldn't find the appropriate words for it. So when Bhagavan asked him what he was trying to do, he said he was trying to write a verse with some particular ideas. But he couldn't form it into a verse. So Bhagavan said, go on, try. You'll be able to do it. But he struggled and he wasn't able to do it. So when he left the paper. I think Bhagavan was sitting on a small mat or something. He left the paper on which he had written these words, Hridaya Guhara Madhye, under Bhagavan's, under the mat. Presumably he did so, hoping that Bhagavan would complete the verse for him, since he had told Bhagavan what he was trying to say. Bhagavan therefore wrote Jagadish's ideas in the form of this verse, and when he completed the verse, he signed it Jagadishan, to show that the ideas expressed in it were Jagadishwara Sastri's rather than his own. However, and when Jagadishwara Sastri came back and saw the verse, he asked Bhagavan, why did you write my name under it? It was you who composed the verse. I only wrote the first 3 words. Then Bhagavan said, it was your idea, so I merely expressed your ideas in the form of this verse. However, except for this phrase, pavana chalana roda, by restraining the movement of the breath, except this idea, all the other ideas in this verse are in perfect accordance with Bhagavan's teachings, presumably because they were ideas that Jagadishwara Sastri had learnt from Bhagavan. So the only idea that we can say here is Jagadishwara Sastri's idea rather than Bhagavan's idea, is this Pavana Chalana Rodat. Why can we say that this is not Bhagavan's idea? Because Bhagavan made it so clear in so many places that we cannot, but all we can achieve by pranayama is a temporary dissolution of mind, or manolaya. We cannot achieve manonasa. āṇmā-niṣṭha in this context implies manonasa, because in order to be as we actually are, in order to be fixed in ourselves, we can be fixed in ourselves, firmly fixed in ourselves, only by eradicating ego. And ego cannot be eradicated by pranayama, as Bhagavan makes clear, for example, in the 8th paragraph of Nāṇmā. In this context, it's worth reading this 8th paragraph, or at least parts of it, to understand why what is said here is not Bhagavan's teaching. And remember, though Bhagavan wrote the Nāṇmā in the form of an essay only in about 1926 or 27, I think, as far as I'm aware, the exact year when Bhagavan wrote it in the form of an essay is not known, but it must have been around 1926 or 27. Except for the first paragraph of ṇāṇā, almost all the ideas in ṇāṇā were replies that Bhagavan gave to Shiva Prakasham Pillai in about 1901 or 1902, when Bhagavan was just in his early 20s. Shiva Prakasham Pillai asked him a series of questions. Since Bhagavan wasn't talking much in those days, Bhagavan would reply. Sometimes he would just write his replies on the sandy ground, but, or at least the first few answers he gave to Shiva Prakasham Pillai, he wrote on the sandy ground. Then, knowing Bhagavan was writing the replies, after that, Shiva Prakasham Pillai began to bring either a slate or a paper and pencil for Bhagavan to write. So, what Shiva Prakasham Pillai recorded of what was written, or what Bhagavan replied, must have been pretty accurate, because Bhagavan had actually written it. So, and Shiva Prakasham Pillai wrote it almost immediately. So he had a copy of Bhagavan's answers, but he never thought of publishing it until many years later, in about 1922 or 23. I think it was 23, but it could have been 22. Shiva Prakasham Pillai Shiva Prakasham Pillai had written a biography of Bhagavan in verse form called Ramana Charita Ahaval. Ahaval is a form of verse in Tamil, but can go on for any number of lines. So it was a multi-line verse, and it wasn't a poem divided up into separate verses. It was just a series of, it was just one long verse with many lines. In that biography, he wrote a brief summary of what Bhagavan had taught him when he first came to him back in 1901 or 1902. So when this, I think it was Manikam Pillai, who was Shiva Prakasham Pillai's nephew, and a very close, almost like he was very close to Shiva Prakasham Pillai. So he wanted to have it published. So it was decided that it would be published, and that some of the, I think it was 25 of the question and answers, 24 or 25, I can't remember the exact number, of the question and answers, but the questions asked by Shiva Prakasham Pillai and answers given by Bhagavan would be published as an appendix. So Manikam Pillai brought it to Bhagavan, got Bhagavan's approval, and then it was published. When it was published, when devotees read this appendix, they were very interested, but Bhagavan had given such teachings, so they asked Shiva Prakasham Pillai to publish all that he had recorded as a separate book. So then ṇāṇā, for the first time, came out as a separate book, which consisted of 30 questions and answers, and some miscellaneous sayings of Bhagavan. That 30 question and answer version was, I think, first published probably in 1923 or 24, and it continued to be published for about 10 years. But a few years after it was published, Bhagavan rewrote it in the form of an essay. And when he rewrote it in the form of an essay, he added the first paragraph, which wasn't there at all in the answers he'd given to Shiva Prakasham Pillai, as a fitting introduction. So he wrote an essay of 20 paragraphs, one entirely new paragraph, and the rest was compiled from the answers he had given to Shiva Prakasham Pillai. But Bhagavan edited it very carefully. He omitted some of the answers he had given because they, for one reason or another, they were not entirely appropriate. They may have been appropriate to give to Shiva Prakasham Pillai at that time, but they were not. Bhagavan didn't consider they were appropriate for inclusion in the essay version. So the essay version is the most reliable version because it's been written by Bhagavan. And Bhagavan, in places, he slightly changed the wording, and he omitted some ideas and he refined certain other ideas. So the essay is entirely a work by Bhagavan. Some years later, that is around 1931, the ashram started its own publication. And because people generally question and answers are more popular than a treatise, like an essay, there was a demand for the question and answer version. But since the 30 question and answer version was being published by another group of Bhagavan's devotees in the town, it was decided to make a new version for the ashram to publish. And that new version was concocted from this 30 question and answer version and Bhagavan's essay version. But it was, whoever compiled it didn't compile it very well, because some sentences are repeated and some portions that Bhagavan had omitted in the essay, deliberately omitted in the essay, were included. That is the 28 question and answer version, but nowadays is available both in Tamil and in English. But we shouldn't take that as such a reliable version. The most reliable version is this essay version. So what Bhagavan wrote in the essay, in this 8th paragraph, as I say, this was many years before this was what Bhagavan had said to Sri Prakasham Pillai, 13 or 14 years before he wrote this verse for Jagadishwara Sastri. So we can say this is the real idea of Bhagavan. And also Bhagavan repeated this in so many ways in other places, in verses 11, 12, 13 and 14 of Upadesha Undiya. He implies very much the same that he writes here. So this is definitely the real opinion of Bhagavan. What he says in this paragraph is, it's not very easy to convey what Bhagavan says here very clearly in English, because some of the words Bhagavan uses here are words for which there's no exact equivalent in English. In the first 2 sentences, he uses two verbs, adangu. Adangu means, adangu has a range of meanings. It means to submit, yield, be subdued, to shrink, become compressed, to cease, to settle, subside, to disappear, to be still, to be comprised or included. So it's got a range of meanings, but here the idea, and the other verb he used in the second sentence is the adaku, which is the cause of adangu. So to cause to be adangu is adaku. So Bhagavan uses these two verbs here. I'm going to, for the sake of simplicity, I will translate it as cease, because that's closest to the meaning that Bhagavan means. But cease can mean cease temporarily or cease permanently. In Manolaya, the mind ceases, but only temporarily. Our aim is manonasa, which is permanent cessation of the mind. So what Bhagavan says in the first sentence is, for the mind to cease, except vicharana. Vicharana means, vicharana is another form of the word, same word as vichara. It means investigation. Here, obviously, it implies self-investigation. So for the mind to cease, except self-investigation, there are no other adequate means. Why are there not other adequate means? The mind can cease by other, that is my explanation, sorry. Why are there no other adequate means? Because though the mind can cease or subside by other means, it will only be temporary, as Bhagavan goes on to explain. So since our aim is the permanent cessation of mind, or manonasa, no other means are adequate, because this is the only means that will bring about manonasa, it's the implication. So Bhagavan goes on in the second sentence to say, if made to cease by other means, the mind remaining as if it had ceased, will again rise again. So its cessation, that means its cessation was only a temporary cessation. And then he goes on to say, even by pranayama, the mind will cease. However, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. Here, subsided is the same word as ceased, but I sometimes will translate as subside, sometimes as ceased. It means both, really. So long as the prana remains, prana means the breath. Well, prana means life in general, all the physiological functions in the body, but the centermost one is breathing. So in this context, prana implies breathing, and also other physiological processes. So long as the prana remains subsided, mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, it will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. It here means the mind. So when the prana becomes active again, when the breathing becomes active again, the mind will also become active. And when the mind becomes active, it will wander under the sway of its vasanas. This clause that it will wander under the sway of its vasanas, how Bhagavan expresses that in Tamil is, pranam velipadam podu, when the prana comes out, tanam, that means tanam is referring to the mind also will come out, tanam velipattu, that means the mind also coming out, vasanai vayatai alayam. It will wander under the sway of its vasanas. This is very significant because why Bhagavan says this is to indicate that the subsidence of mind brought about by pranayama does not destroy the vasanas. So as soon as the mind emerges, it will wander under the sway of its vasanas as before. So in other words, nothing is achieved by that. To illustrate this, Bhagavan often used to tell the story of a yogi who lived on the banks of the Ganga. And he was very adept at pranayama and other yoga practices, so adept that he was able to go into nirvikalpa samadhi for prolonged periods of time. The nirvikalpa samadhi of the yogis is, as Bhagavan clarified, it is just a state of manolaya. It is a temporary dissolution of mind. So to illustrate the ineffectiveness of such laya, of nirvikalpa samadhi, or any state of laya, Bhagavan used to tell this story. So this yogi was so adept at his yoga practices, he could go into nirvikalpa samadhi for prolonged periods of time. And because he lived on the banks of the Ganga, there was a small village nearby. And the villagers had great respect for this yogi, who they took to be a great mahamā, a great soul, because he was seen to be sitting for hours or sometimes even days together, absorbed in samadhi. They thought he's a great sage. So one of the villagers had become his disciple. One day when this yogi woke up from his nirvikalpa samadhi, he was feeling thirsty. So he asked his disciple to go and fetch water from the nearby Ganga. So the disciple dutifully went to the river and fetched some water and brought it back to the yogi. But by the time he had come back, the yogi had again gone into samadhi. And this time he went into samadhi so deeply that he remained in that state for 300 years. How was he able to remain in that state for 300 years? Because when the breath is controlled, all the physiological functions of the body will, that is, very adept yogis can slow down the breathing and other physiological functions. So maybe just one breath a minute, 1 or 2 heartbeats a minute. So by slowing down the whole metabolism of the body can remain without food or water for prolonged periods of time. And so this yogi lived for 300, stayed in that state for 300 years. When Bhagavan told stories like this, he would always add some color to them. So he said, within those 300 years, everything had changed in the world. That is, when he went into samadhi, India was entirely a Hindu country. It was ruled by Hindu kings. But while he was in samadhi, the Muslims had come and invaded North India. So the politics of the country had changed. The Ganga had changed course, and so the Ganga was several miles away. And because the Ganga had changed course, the village also moved to be near the Ganga. So the yogi was in the dense jungle grew up around him. But after 300 years, when he woke up, the first thing he did was he angrily asked, "Where's my water?" What Bhagavan's comment on this is, the last thought that was in his mind before he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi was the first thought that popped up as soon as he woke up from Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That means that not even the most superficial thought in the mind was destroyed in spite of remaining in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years. Often Bhagavan just left the explanation at that and left it to people to understand. But sometimes he would explain it, if he was questioned further, he would explain. When people asked him, what is the significance of this then? And what Bhagavan explained is that since even the most superficial thought is not destroyed by remaining in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for so many years, what to say about the vasanas? The vasanas all remain intact. So when you come out of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, all the same vasanas come back again. That is why he wrote here, mind will come out again and wander under the sway of its vasanas. That's exactly what happened to that yogi. As soon as his mind came out, its vasanas took over. So the Bhagavan's view of yoga and Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the highest goal of yoga is to achieve Nirvikalpa Samadhi, because what is yoga all about? Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, Patanjali wrote at the beginning of his Yoga Sutra. Chitta vritti nirodha means curbing or restraining, that is curbing of or restraint of the chitta vrittis, the mental activities, the movements of the mind. So the aim of yoga is to stop all mental activity. And when you stop all mental activity, you remain in the mind subsides in laya. I mean, the cessation of mental activity means the subsidence of the mind. When the mind subsides, it subsides not in nasa, but only in laya. Laya is a temporary dissolution of the mind, like sleep. Sleep is a state of laya. Likewise, Nirvikalpa Samadhi is a state of laya. So Bhagavan's view of yoga is the most you can achieve by yoga on its own is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And Nirvikalpa Samadhi is just a state of manolaya, so it's not of any lasting spiritual benefit. Of course, it's very nice to stay in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, just like it's nice to be in sleep. In any state of manolaya, we're free of the mind, at least temporarily, so it's very pleasant. But it is not, we are not looking for a temporary relief from the mind, because the mind is surely going to come back again. What we are looking for is the destruction of the mind. That is the true spiritual goal. It's not manolaya, but manonasa. That is why in Upadesha Undiyā, Bhagavan in verses 10 and 11, he explains that the mind and prana both originate from the same source. If you control one, you control the other. And to illustrate this, Sadhuam often used to say, if you have a light and a fan, but are both controlled by the same switch, and if the switch is a dimmer switch, you can, if you want to reduce the light, you can reduce the light, but the fan will slow down. If you want to reduce the fan, the light will dim. If you want to increase the fan, the light will become brighter. In that analogy, the fan is the breath, the prana, and the light is the mind. So by controlling the mind, you control the breath. By controlling the breath, you control the mind. Control here means to subdue the activity of. So the aim of yoga is just to stop the activity of the mind. That Bhagavan said, in other words, to stop thinking. But Bhagavan said that is not a worthy aim, because if the mind is stopped, it will come back again. The only worthy aim is to know what we actually are, because only by knowing what we actually are will the mind dissolve in such a way that it will never rise again. So, what Bhagavan, after explaining that controlling the breath is a means to control the mind in verses 11 and 12 of Upadesha, in verse 13, he says that dissolution of mind is of two kinds, laya and nasa. What is dissolved in laya will rise again, but if its form dies in nasa, it will not rise again. The implication is that our aim is nasa, not laya. And then in verse 14, he says, this is where he shows how the yogi can make use of the calmness of mind achieved by pranayama in order to know himself. That in Bhagavan is not recommending that we follow this path, but for those who already are following this path, what Bhagavan says is, if the mind which is, this is in verse 14 of Upadesha, if the mind which is subdued or made to subside by means of pranayama, only if that mind is sent on the or-vari will its form die. Or-vari, vari means path. Or has two meanings. Or can mean oru, or one, so it can mean sent on one path. But which one path? Obviously, Bhagavan is not talking about any one path, because pranayama itself is a path. So why not by pranayama? He's talking about a particular path. The one path is how we have to take it, if we take the meaning of or as one. But or also has another meaning. Or is a verb that means to investigate or know. So often in poetry, the root form of a verb, in this case or, is used in place of the adjectival participle. The adjectival participle is aurum. So or here means aurum. Aurum vari means the investigating path. What is the investigating path? The path of self-investigation. So what Bhagavan is referring to there by or vari is this one path of self-investigation. So only if the mind is sent on this one path of self-investigation will its form die. So however far a yogi may go in their practice of yoga, they cannot achieve manonasa without sooner or later turning the mind back within to sending it on this path of self-investigation, because then only will its form die. So this is Bhagavan's very clear opinion. So for Bhagavan, yoga is not, it's an incomplete, it can only lead to manolaya, which is of no use. Before the mind subsides in manolaya, we should then turn it within. But in order to turn the mind within, we don't have to control the breath, because to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, the mind will subside. And when the mind subsides, the breath will also subside. So it's trying to control the breath in order to control the mind is putting the cart before the horse. All we need to do is to make the mind subside. The most effective means to make the mind subside is self-attentiveness or self-investigation. And that is the only means that will bring about the permanent cessation of mind, as Bhagavan implies in this paragraph. So, coming back to this eighth paragraph, as I said, in the first sentence he says, for the mind to cease except self-investigation, there's no other adequate means. If made to cease by other means, the mind remaining as if it had ceased will rise again. In other words, what he implies, the mind remaining for a while as if it had ceased, will rise again. Even by pranayama, the mind will cease. However, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, it will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. I'd read up to this point, and then I talked about the story of the yogi, which Bhagavan used to illustrate this point. Then he goes on to explain why controlling the breath will restraining the breath will restrain the mind. The birthplace for both the mind and for prana is one. In other words, they both come from the same source. Thought alone is the swarupa, or the very nature of the mind. The thought called I alone is the first thought of the mind. It alone is ego. From where ego rises, from there alone the breath also rises. Therefore, when the mind ceases, the breath also ceases. And when the breath ceases, the mind also ceases. The breath is said to be the gross form of the mind. Until the time of death, the mind keeps the prana in the body, and at the sometimes Bhagavan is using here the word muchu. Other times he uses the word prana. So when he uses prana, I'll use the word prana. When he says muchu, I'll say breath. So when the prana, therefore when the mind ceases, the prana also ceases. And when the prana ceases, the mind also ceases. The prana is called the gross form of the mind. Until the time of death, the mind keeps the prana in the body, and at the moment of the body dies, grasping it, that's grasping the prana, it goes. In other words, it takes the life along with it. Therefore, pranayama is just an aid to restrain the mind. In other words, to make the mind subside, cease temporarily, but it will not bring about manonasa. Manonasa means annihilation of mind. Many of you who've read this before will be familiar with another 3 sentences that occur after the sentence, ahayal manamadankum podu pranamum, pranamadankum podu manamum adangam. That is the sentence that says, therefore when the mind ceases, the prana also ceases, and when the prana ceases, the mind also ceases. There are 3 other sentences in all the more recent versions of Nāṇmā. However, I didn't include those in what I just read because these 3 sentences were not part of what Bhagavan originally said to Sri Prakasham Pillai or originally wrote in the essay. These seem to have been interpolated sometime around the mid-1930s. Did Bhagavan approve it? Of course, Bhagavan will approve anything if people want. What I suspect is someone would have raised an objection about this, saying, what about in sleep? In sleep, the body continues breathing, even though the mind has subsided. So Bhagavan, understanding that the questioner was not able to understand or accept his deeper teachings, but according to Bhagavan's deeper teachings, there's no body at all in sleep. It's only in waking and dream that a body seems to exist. In sleep, there's no body or world or anything because there's no ego. All these things exist in the view of ourself as ego. So when we as ego subside in sleep or in nirvikalpa samadhi, there is no world at all. That is Bhagavan's view. But sometimes he had to dilute this teaching for those who were not ready to grasp it. So obviously someone had asked him a question. Well, we can assume, because I don't think someone would have just made up these sentences and added it. Someone would have asked Bhagavan a question, Bhagavan would have given this answer, and then they would say, oh, Bhagavan, shouldn't this be added there? And Bhagavan said, okay, if you want, you add it. But it's not, this is incompatible with Bhagavan's deeper teachings. But anyway, I'll just read the sentences. However, in sleep, even though the mind has ceased, the prana does not cease. This is what is contrary to Bhagavan's teaching, because according to Bhagavan, when the mind ceases, everything ceases. Ahande undayan anatam undaham. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrel indru anatam. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. He says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So, in the light of those teachings, to say the prana does not cease in sleep is clearly not Bhagavan's real teaching. It is a concessionary teaching given to someone who wasn't able to understand the deeper teaching. And then Bhagavan went on to say, it is arranged thus by the ordinance of God for the purpose of protecting the body, and so that other people do not wonder whether the body has died. When the mind ceases in waking and in samadhi, the prana ceases. So that's just, Bhagavan just added, well, at least the first two of those sentences are definitely a concession. The third sentence, Bhagavan is again emphasizing the important point: when the mind ceases in waking and in samadhi, the prana also ceases. So anyway, the most important point here is Bhagavan concludes this paragraph by saying, therefore, pranayama is just an aid to restrain the mind, but will not bring about manonasa. So since it will not bring about manonasa, without manonasa, there cannot be atmanishta. Atmanishta means to be as we actually are. We can't be as we actually are without destroying the mind, because the mind is the root of destroying the mind includes eradicating ego, because ego is the root of the mind. So only when ego is eradicated, the mind destroyed. Without eradicating ego, we cannot remain in atmanishta. We cannot be firmly established in the state of being as we actually are. In other words, so this pavala chanara rodat in this verse is incompatible with the deeper teachings of Bhagavan. But presumably this is what Jagadishwara Sastri wanted to write. So Bhagavan wrote it for him, but he clearly signed the verse as Jagadishan. As I mentioned earlier, Kavyaganta included this verse in the second chapter of Brahmana Gita, and he gave his own interpretation to it. He gave a rather peculiar interpretation to it, because anyone reading this verse, even the Sanskrit version, would normally take it to mean two paths: the mind sinking, investigating itself, or restraining the movement of the breath. However, Kavyaganta interpreted it as three paths: the mind investigating itself, sinking or diving, and restraining the breath. So first path is the mind investigating itself. Second is the mind diving. And the third is restraining the breath. How the mind is to dive or to subside without investigating itself, he doesn't explain. But anyway, that was his idea. This is clearly not Bhagavan's idea. And Bhagavan made this clear in his Tamil translation. In fact, Bhagavan perhaps wrote this Tamil translation very carefully in order to indicate that what Kavyaganta had said in his explanation of the Sanskrit version is a wrong interpretation. I'll now come to the Tamil verse, because that will make this very clear. And that will make this the main topic we're dealing about today. What Bhagavan says in the Tamil version of this verse, in the same way as the Sanskrit, there are 4 lines. The first 2 lines are one sentence. The second 2 lines are another. Well, in fact, in Tamil, the second 2 lines are split into 2 sentences, rather significantly, as I will explain. So what he says in the first sentence, the first 2 lines, is idayamāṅ guhaiyiṉ nāppaṇ ṇēkamām biramma mātram adu āṇmā-v-āha nērē avividum āṇmā-v-āha. What that means is idayamāṅ guhaiyiṉ means in the heart, in the cave which is the heart. Ṇāppaṇ means center. In the center of the cave which is the heart, Brahman, ṇēkamām Brahman, Brahman, which is the one. But ṇēkam means one, but here we have to take it to mean the one. In other words, the only one. Because as it's explained in the Upanishads, Brahman is ṇēkam eva advitiyam, one only without a second. So that is the one Bhagavan is referring to here. So in the center of the cave that is the heart, Brahman, which is the one, alone shines directly as I am I. He uses the same Sanskrit term, aham, whereas in most Tamil verses he usually says nan, but here he says aham. This is often translated, āṇmā-v-āha or nān is often translated in English books as I-I. This is a wrong interpretation. If you say in Tamil, or in Sanskrit, aham deham, that means I body. But you don't write I-body. What it implies is I am the body. Because in both Sanskrit and Tamil, if you've got a subject and a subject complement, you don't need the copula. Copula is the verb. If you say A is B, A is the subject, is the copula, and B is the subject complement. The copula means the verb to be that links the subject with the subject complement. Usually the copula is the verb to be. It can also be a few other verbs. You can also say seems is also a copula. A seems to be B. Seems to be, but in Tamil, whenever you have a sentence consisting of a subject and a subject complement with no verb, the verb that is clearly implied is the verb to be. So aham means I am I. Aham deham means I am the body. And it's exactly the same in Tamil. So aham or nan means I am I. And as I said, Bhagavan often when he talked about the death of ego, he said, ego is the false awareness, I am this body. When that dies, what shines forth is I am I. But if you'll see in many English books, in talks and in various translations of Bhagavan's works, this, instead of translating it correctly as I am I, it's wrongly translated as I. Even in the context where Bhagavan says, for example, in talks, I remember there's one sentence that's something to the effect, when I is kept up as I alone, that means when I am I, that is Brahman. When it flies off at a tangent as I am this or I am that, that is ego. So when he's contrasting I am this body with I am I, why they chose to put a hyphen, and instead of translating it correctly as I am I, why they chose to put a hyphen there, God alone knows. But someone started this, and all the sheep followed suit. So you'll find in the vast majority of English books, nan or aham is translated as I, which doesn't actually mean anything. Even, I will add here, even in some of the older translations by Sadhuam, you will find this term I occurs. The reason being Sadhuam's knowledge of English was very limited. So he thought that was a shorthand way of saying I am I in English. It never occurred to him, but it could mean anything other than I am I. Only when I explained to him, I doesn't really mean anything in English. He said, doesn't it mean I am I? I said, no, it doesn't. It means nothing. And some people take it to mean, some people have said the vibration I, because they take spurana to mean vibration. A vibration is a type of spurana, but it's not the spurana Bhagavan is talking about. When Bhagavan uses the term spurana, he's not talking about a vibration or flashing or anything. He's talking about the clarity of self-awareness, the clarity I am I. That is what he means by spurana. So anyway, the first sentence of this verse, in the center of the cave of that is the heart, Brahman, which is the one, alone shines directly as oneself as I am I. That's the first sentence. Then he goes on to say, taṉṇai enni al, uڵḷadu vāyan adun udun al, manatal idayamē sārvāy. Idayamē sārvāy means may you reach the heart. How to reach the heart? He says, taṉṇai āṇmā-v-āha vāyu vadaṉuḍa maṇmā. By the mind that sinks, investigating itself, or that sinks with the breath. He doesn't clearly mention here controlling, restraining the breath. He said the mind that sinks, that is, the word he uses for sink here is āl. Āl is can also mean dive, but in this context, as I say, it's more appropriate to take it as sink. And he uses this verb twice. And in this case, he's using is the root of the verb, but he's using it in the sense of a adjectival participle. So taṉṇai āl means that that any here implies, any literally means thinking, but it implies investigating. So the mind that sinks investigating itself, or the mind that sinks with the breath. When he said the mind that sinks with the breath, he's not stating so clearly what is clearly stated in Tamil, but it's controlling the breath. It can simply mean the mind that sinks with the breath. That is, if you turn your attention within, the mind will subside along with the breath. Because by turning our attention within, the mind subsides. And when the mind subsides, the breath will also subside along with it. So in Tamil, he's put it in a much more ambiguous way to try and smooth over this wrong this wrong meaning in the Sanskrit. Though he himself wrote it in Sanskrit, he wrote it on behalf of Jagdisha. When he was asked to translate it into Tamil, he did so in a more nuanced way to try and bypass this wrong interpretation. So when the mind, this sentence, the main thing is idayamē sārvāy. That means may you reach the heart. It's sārvāy is an optative or an imperative. We can take it either way, but in English we can't. That is sārvāy. The I there clearly means it's a second person form of the verb. So since it's second person, in English, if you say you reach the heart, it sounds like a statement. If we want to say the imperative in English, we usually omit you. So to make it clear that you is there, I take it as an optative. In Tamil, it can be taken either as imperative or optative. So I say, may you reach the heart. That's the main thing. And there are two ways of reaching the heart, either by the mind that sinks investigating itself, or by the mind that sinks with the breath. How it sinks with the breath is Bhagavan left it a little bit ambiguous here. Because when the mind sinks by investigating itself, the breath will also sink. So Bhagavan nicely left a little bit of ambiguity here to avoid the very glaring incompatibility with his teaching that is there in the Sanskrit. And two things here. Firstly, he does that. He makes he doesn't specify restraining the breath. He simply says it sinks with the breath. And he's also split this, what was one sentence in Sanskrit, he split as two sentences in Tamil. So first he says, may you enter the heart by the mind that sinking, investigating yourself, or by the mind sinking with the breath. Even if we take sinking with the breath means to mean by pranayama, the mind sinking with the breath that sinks due to breath restraint, even if we take it in that way, all he's saying is that you should enter the heart, you should reach the heart. In a sense, we can say, if you control the mind, if you restrain the mind by restraining the breath, eventually the mind will subside into the heart. So that way you do reach, but it's only reaching the heart in the sense when we're in laya, where is the mind in laya? It's dissolved in the heart, because where else can it dissolve? The heart here means our real nature, that which shines within us as I am, that is the heart. So reaching the heart means subsiding back into our source. Even in laya, we subside back into our source. Every night when we fall asleep, we subside back into our source. The problem with sleep or nirvikalpa samadhi or any other state of laya, sooner or later we come out of it. Whereas in manonasa, we never come out of it, as he says in verse 13 of Upadeshandaya. So here he's to make this verse a little bit more ambiguous and to make the wrong idea in the Sanskrit less glaring. Bhagavan, firstly, he doesn't specify restraining the breath. Secondly, he says, with the breath you can enter the heart. But then as a separate clause, he says, may you be one fixed in yourself. āṇmā-v-āha ṇiṭṭa ṇāvāy. Ṇiṭṭa means nishtan, one who is nishta means to be fixed. Nishtan means one who is fixed. May you be one fixed in yourself. In other words, may you be as you actually are. In order to be as we actually are, we have to investigate ourselves. So Bhagavan has been very careful in his translation he's translated what's in Sanskrit, but in such a way to make it, in a very nuanced way, to make it more ambiguous. Later, as I say, this verse was first written by Bhagavan in 1915 in Sanskrit. Some years later, Bhagavan translated it into Tamil. I can't remember off the top of my head when he translated it into Tamil, but it wasn't immediately. It was some years later. But in 1928, in July 1928, Murugana asked Bhagavan to compose a work. Well, as Murugan put it in his Pairam to Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, what he prayed to Bhagavan is, so that we may be saved, so that the world may be saved. The world means the world of spiritual aspirants may be saved. Teach us the nature of reality and the means of attaining it. And so he asked Bhagavan to write Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. But before he asked Bhagavan to write Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he had gathered together 21 verses, which Bhagavan had composed at various times in the past, miscellaneous verses. And using that as the base, he asked Bhagavan to expand on that. When Bhagavan wrote Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu over the course of the next 3 weeks or so, one by one, Murugana started removing the old verses, saying, oh, this isn't quite appropriate, this isn't quite appropriate. So all except one or two of the original 21 verses were not included in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. And even among the one or two that were included, one of them he rewrote it, and he packed more meaning into it. So Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu was almost entirely a completely fresh work, composed in those 3 weeks from mid-July up to about the first week of August 1928. But then Murugana suggested that the verses that had been relegated, which were by that time were about 21 verses or so, should become a supplement to Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So they were called Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. So in the first edition of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the Anubandham had only about 21 verses, or maybe one or two more, but it wasn't the 40 that we know now. But among those verses that were included were 3 verses, but were previously Bhagavan had composed as a set. That is the verses that are now verses 9, 25, and 40 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. Before the formation of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, they were a little separate work that Bhagavan had composed. They were all translated verses. Verses 9 and 25 are translations of verses 46 and 47 of David Kalotram. That not David Kalotram as such, that is the chapter of David Kalotram, but Bhagavan translated into Tamil, that's Jnana Vichara Patalam. These two verses, 46 and 47, for each of these two verses, there are two translations. There's the one that's included in Bhagavan's translation of the whole work, the whole chapter, and there's these two verses, verses 9 and 25 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. And verse 40, Bhagavan translated from some other source. So, but when Murugan and Bhagavan were arranging the verses of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham in order, they were very carefully selecting which verse should go where, which verses were fitting together. That's why these three verses, though originally they were one set, they were split up. And this verse that was taken as verse 9 was included here immediately after this verse for a very important reason, in order to make clear, but because if anyone reads this verse 8, or particularly the Sanskrit version of it, without considering it in the context of Bhagavan's teachings as a whole, they can easily be misled into thinking there are two ways. There's either self-investigation or restraining the breath. Or if you're Kavyaganta, you can take it even of three ways. You can either have self-investigation, you can attain ṇāppa either by self-investigation or by diving or by restraining the breath. But how you can dive, he doesn't say. But Bhagavan makes it clear in the Tamil verse, as I said, by including the verb ar, which means sinking, with both the with both taṉṇai, which means investigating oneself, and vāyu vadaṉuḍa, which means with the breath. So the mind sinking, investigating itself, or sinking with the breath. So Bhagavan made it very clear that Kavyaganta's interpretation of this as three paths was wrong. But in Tamil, he even tried he tried to write it in a more, I mean, he did write, not tried, he did write it in a more nuanced way to include an ambiguity, to lessen the impact of this clause, Pavla Chanana Rodat. So, so people reading this Sanskrit verse without considering it in the context of Bhagavan's teachings as a whole, they can easily take it to mean, but there are two ways to attain ṇāppa. Either we investigate ourselves, or we can just control the breath. If we control the breath, then we'll attain ṇāppa. That's the implication of the Sanskrit verse. And even slightly in the, I mean, not so blatantly, but also slightly in the Tamil verse. But to make it clear that this is not Bhagavan's real idea, he and Murugan had decided to place immediately after this verse one that states clearly that only the awareness that exists and shines as I, in other words, the pure awareness I am, only that will give liberation by eradicating ego. Thereby, that is the next verse, thereby implies that it's only by the mind sinking deep within by self-investigations, swam chimvata, thereby dissolving forever in the heart, that we can be firmly fixed in and in and as ourselves. So the next verse I'll deal with in more detail next time, but I'll just briefly read the meaning of it. What he says in the next verse is, what awareness is the blemishless, motionless I form in the heart lotus, only that awareness, which is I, will give inner liberation by removing I. No. what that means is when he says what awareness, only that awareness, this is a particular sentence formation that is very common in both Tamil and Sanskrit. You first refer to something in a what clause, and then in the next clause you refer to the same thing as that. So in English we would usually put this as a relative clause. Only in English, how we would express this idea normally is only that awareness which is the blemishless, motionless I form in the heart lotus will give liberation by removing I. But in the way it's expressed in Sanskrit and Tamil is, what awareness is the blemishless, motionless I form in the heart lotus, only that awareness, which is I, will give liberation by removing I. No. What he means by that is, I'll just read the explanatory paraphrase to make it slightly clearer. What awareness exists and shines in the heart lotus as the blemishless, immaculate or pure and motionless I form. What he means by, he says, aham uruvam. Uruvam means form, but it implies here swarupa. So aham uruvam implies aham swarupa, in other words, atma swarupa, the swarupa or real nature of I. Only that awareness, which is I, namely atma swarupa, our real nature, will give inner liberation. Inner liberation can also be interpreted as liberation, which is I, but that's a bit, that's not the main meaning. Inner liberation by removing, expelling, or banishing I. I here refers to ego. That is the ego that's to be eradicated. So the implication of this verse is only that awareness which shines as I will give inner liberation by removing ego. In other words, it's only by attending to that fundamental awareness I am that we can attain inner liberation by removing ego. So that this is, Bhagavan added this verse here as a corrective to that Padacchēdam Rodat idea. Padacchēdam Rodat is not an adequate means. That Padacchēdam Rodat means restraining the movement of the breath. That is not an adequate means to achieve Atmanishta. Bhagavan, in order to make that clear, he wrote this, he included this 9th verse in this particular place, just as a corrective to that. Sorry, my explanation has been a very long explanation, for which I apologize, but I hope it was clear all that I said. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Thank you, Michael. So the first question is from alas, as Ram asks, so should breath observation, which is a method that Bhagavan has said, if somebody really wants to practice pranayama, he said just watch the breath.
Yeah.
So the question from Ram is, should breath observation even be pursued?
Not at all necessary. That is, for people who wanted to do pranayama, Bhagavan said, in order to do pranayama correctly, you need to do it under the guidance of an experienced yogi, because if without proper guidance you try to restrain the mind by controlling the breath, it can have adverse effects. It can lead to mental aberration and everything. That's why it's always said it has to be done under the guidance of an experienced yogi. But Bhagavan said all that they achieve by their careful breath restraint, the careful formulas, how many matras, how many moments you should breathe in, how many moments you should hold the breath, how many moments you should breathe out. Or there are so many formulas they have in yoga for this, and you have to go through different exercises to achieve achieve mastery of all these things. all this is unnecessary. Bhagavan said, if you want to achieve that effect, simply observe the breath. If you simply observe the breath, automatically the breath will come down. If ever in the course of your day, you find yourself in a much agitated state of mind, maybe you're under a lot of pressure, got a lot of worries, and your mind is much agitated, if you want to calm yourself down, rather than taking some pills or something, a very effective way to calm the mind down is simply observe the breathing. If you observe your breathing, you will find the breathing will calm down and the mind will calm down along with it. So that's a very simple technique for calming the mind. But there's an even more effective means to calm the mind. If rather than observing the breath, if you observe yourself, in other words, if you're self-attentive, that is the most effective means to calm down the mind. For those of us who are drawn to this path of self-investigation, there's no appeal in this watching the breath. And actually, what you will find, some people think, first you have to calm the mind down and then you can attend to yourself. But if you try to calm the mind down, one of the most effective ways to calm the mind down, other than self-investigation, is simply watching the breath. But if you habituate the mind to watching the breath and then you try to attend to yourself, you will find that the breath keeps on distracting your attention away from yourself back. So it's better not to go down that course. It's better to start right from the start, attending to ourselves. No aid is needed to attend to ourselves. But one thing that we all know clearly at all times is I am. So since we are all clearly aware of ourselves, we can, at any moment, whatever we may be doing, we can always, if we have enough interest, enough love to do so, we can always turn our attention back to ourselves. And turning our attention back to ourselves is the most effective way to calm the mind down. So if we are often practicing this self-investigation, our mind will tend to become less and less agitated because it's more natural for it to be in a calm state because it's often attending to itself. Of course, sometimes even the best of us get agitated by something or other at times, but the degree to which we get agitated and the frequency with which we get agitated will reduce to the extent to which we practice this self-investigation.
I guess my fundamental question is, if we go by the watching the breath, actually, is it taking us in a wrong direction, which is we are going to only get manolaya and not manonasha? So is it actually detrimental if we watch the breath, is my fundamental question.
I don't think you'll achieve manolaya by watching the breath. That is why they have all these exercises in yoga, all these pranayama exercises, because Bhagavan often, when Bhagavan was talking about yoga, he said, Bhagavan often pointed out, how is it possible to stop mental activity, to stop thought, in other words, by a thought? If you try to stop the mind, you're using a thought to try and stop thought. So we can't simply by meditation or any mental exercise, we can't stop the activity of the mind, because the mind has to be active in order to stop its activity. So it's a self-defeating thing. So there are two ways in which we can stop the activity of the mind. One way is by pranayama. That by watching the breath, it'll calm the mind down. It will not stop the mind entirely. But by actual pranayama, by advanced practice of pranayama under proper guidance, you can gain the skill that yogi on the banks of the Ganga had to often go into manolaya. But there's no benefit in that. So you're not in danger of going into manolaya simply by observing the breath. You'll just be calming your mind down. But since we can calm the mind down more effectively by attending to ourselves, it's not necessary for us I mean, it's an unnecessary distraction to attempt to try watching the breath. In this context, I'll just say one other thing. That is, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Patanjali's yoga, as taught in the Yoga Sutra, is called Ashtanga Yoga. That is the 8 limbs of yoga. Anga means the limbs. But whenever Bhagavan talked about yoga, he generally talked about only one of those 8 limbs. That is this pranayama. Why is that? Because pranayama is the key technique in yoga. The other practices are yama, niyama. I've forgotten the order in which they come. Yama and niyama are the various types of moral, internal and external restraints, moral restraints and so on. And then there's dharana, dhyana, different types of concentration, meditation, going all the way up to samadhi. So the pranayama is one of these 8, but pranayama is the key to yoga because, as Bhagavan made clear, merely by meditation, by mental activity, you cannot stop mental activity. So there are only 2 ways to stop mental activity. Deliberate. I mean, of course, we all stop mental activity every day when we fall asleep, but that's because we're tired. But apart from tiredness, and you can also stop mental activity by taking some anesthetic drug or by getting a blow on the head and going into coma. These are all ways of stopping mental activity, but for stopping the activity of the mind deliberately, the 2 main means are, one is pranayama, one is āṇmā-vichāra, self-investigation or self-attentiveness. If you go down the pranayama route, you will be able to stop all mental activity, but only temporarily. That is what Bhagavan is saying in the 8th paragraph of Nāṇā. It's only a temporary dissolution of mind. Therefore, pranayama cannot destroy the mind. So, since all the dharana, dhyana, and other practices that they have in yoga, none of these will work on their own without pranayama. So pranayama is the key technique in yoga for restraining the mind, but it will lead only to manolaya, not to manonasa. So the yogis don't use the term nirvikalpa samadhi, but I've forgotten what term is actually used in the Yoga Sutra, but it's equivalent of nirvikalpa samadhi. It's only a state of manolaya. It's of no use spiritually. So that's why Bhagavan insisted that the only means to restrain the mind in such a way that it will never rise again is āṇmā-vichāra. So why not take āṇmā-vichāra from the very beginning? Why to go all these roundabout routes like yoga? Because yoga in and of itself is useless. The yogis, in order to bring about the permanent dissolution of the mind, the permanent chitta-vritti nirodha, their only way is by self-investigation. So why not take the self-investigation from the start? That's Bhagavan's point. And in yoga, they don't mention this self-investigation clearly or explicitly in yoga. So they're only seeking this nirvikalpa samadhi, which is a very pleasant state, but it's like sleep is a very pleasant state, but it's of no use. We don't get any closer to destroying the mind, however long we may remain in nirvikalpa samadhi. Because the vasanas all remain intact, and when the mind comes out, it will again wander under the sway of its vasanas.
Thank you, Michael. So in one of the articles that you wrote on this topic, there was one sentence I remember. I may not be 100% right, but this is what I remember. While all other practices are neither sufficient nor necessary, self-attention is both sufficient and necessary.
Yes. No other practice is necessary. No other practice is sufficient. The only practice that is sufficient is self-investigation. So it is also the only practice that is necessary.
Right. So there is this misconception that you have to do something else and calm the mind down and then get into self-investigation. Well, we don't have to.
We don't have to, because the most effective means to calm the mind down is self-investigation.
Right.
Because as Bhagavan says, Tedinal otum pidikam, to the extent, Tedinal otum pidikam is a sentence in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means if thought it takes flight, that is to the extent to which we attend to ego, ego will subside. So when ego subsides, everything subsides along with it. So the most effective means to calm the mind down is this practice of self-investigation. So we don't have to calm the mind down in order to investigate ourselves. We have to investigate ourselves in order to calm the mind down permanently.
Right.
So no other practices are necessary at all.
Right.
And even if we do the other practices, they're not sufficient. So why to follow a practice that is neither necessary nor sufficient when we have a very simple practice that is both necessary and sufficient?
Exactly.
It's the only practice that is necessary. Sorry, it's the only practice that is sufficient, and therefore the only practice that is necessary.
Right. So, and Swami used to illustrate this with the story of a guy who was learning a bicycle. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yes. If you want to learn, if you're given a cycle to Vellore, Vellore is a town to the north of Tiruvannamalai, and you've never ridden a bicycle before, you have to practice. But rather than practicing on the road to Tirukkoilo, which is leading south, in other words, away from Vellore, the logical thing to do is to practice your cycling on the road to Vellore. It may take you may have to go 10 or 20 miles before you master the skill of cycling, but by the time you got there, you're at least 10 or 20 miles closer to Vellore. I think Vellore is maybe about 50 miles north of Tiruvannamalai. So you're well on your way. Whereas if you practice cycling on the opposite direction, you're further away from your goal. So the wise thing to do is to practice self-investigation from the beginning. And as Bhagavan said, any amount of effort you make in any other path cannot be equal to even a few moments of effort made in this path. This is such an effective path. So if we've understood Bhagavan correctly, we will understand no other practices are necessary. The only necessary practice is this self-investigation. So why not start with this? And this is something anyone can do. Because as Murugan says in the Anupalavi of āṇmā-v-āha, oneself is so very clear, even to the dullest of person, but in comparison, a nelikai on the palm is an amlaka on the palm is unclear in comparison to how clearly we are all aware I am. So when I am is shining so clearly at every moment of there's never a moment when we have any doubt about our existence. We always know clearly, yes, I do exist. It's shining so clearly. Why not we attend to that ever-shining existence of ourselves?
Thank you, Michael.
And though we say existence of ourself, of course, our existence and ourself are not two different things. It's because of the limitation of language. That is, what we are is our existence.
Right. So Malcolm, I'm going to come to your question soon. I know you asked it earlier, but just pulling up the related questions here. So in this context, Sudha is asking, but isn't something better than nothing? So not just pranayama, there is pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, so forth. So I think you answered it, but you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, all these practices are there, but where are they leading? They cannot even lead to laya without pranayama. They may give some concentration of mind, they may give some clarity of mind, better than these yoga practices actually are the bhakti practices, because the bhakti practices are more effective at purifying the mind, because the impurities of the mind are the vishaya vasanas. So the mind is purified to the extent to which we stop it rushing out in many directions. So by focusing all our love on God, we are thereby purifying the mind, because to the extent to which we fix our mind on God, we are not allowing the mind to wander after other things. So other than āṇmā-vichāra, the most effective type of meditation is meditating with love on God, because God is an object of love. What they meditate on yoga doesn't talk much about love, but so they're meditating, their various practices are just aims. The principal aim of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, and Bhagavan said that is not a worthy aim. Well, in ṇāṇā, in the 6th paragraph, he says, however many thoughts rise, so what?
1 second. So you may want to explain what chitta vritti nirodha means.
Chitta vritti nirodha, that's what I mentioned it earlier. That's what Patanjali says. I think it's right at the beginning of the Yoga Sutra. It's not in the first verse. It may be the second or the third verse, but it's really the opening statement of the Yoga Sutra. It's a definition of what is yoga. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the restraint or curbing of the chitta vrittis. Chitta here means mind. Vritti means the activity or movement of the mind. In other words, thoughts. So stopping thoughts is what yoga is all about. Bhagavan is not concerned with stopping thoughts. He says, however many thoughts rise, so what? In the 6th paragraph of ṇāṇā. However many thoughts rise, so what? As and when each thought arises, if we vigilantly investigate to whom does it arise, it will be clear to me. What he means there, he doesn't mean but if we question to whom, but if we investigate to whom. So to whom do all thoughts appear? Only to me. So what he means by investigating to whom is turning our attention away from whatever may appear back towards ourselves, the one to whom it appears. And having turned our attention back to ourselves, we must hold on to that self-attentiveness. That's what he means in the next sentence when he says, if one investigates who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace, and the thought that had risen will also subside. So investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever has appeared back towards ourselves. Investigating who am I means holding on, having turned our attention back to ourselves, we need to then hold on to that self-attentiveness. By holding on to that self-attentiveness, the mind will subside back into its birthplace, and the thought which had risen, because there's no one to attend to it, will also subside. So the chitta vritti nirodha, the curbing of mental activity, is a byproduct of self-investigation. It is not the aim of self-investigation. The aim of self-investigation is what? To know who am I. That's what self-investigation is all about. Why do we attend to ourselves? In order to see what we actually are. We are not attending to ourselves just to stop thoughts. That's a byproduct. We're attending to ourselves in order to see what we actually are. Because only when we see what we actually are, in other words, only when we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, will ego thereby be annihilated. And only when ego is annihilated, well, annihilation of ego is itself manonasa, which is liberation.
So totally two different goals.
It's two different goals. Yes.
Totally different goals. And I think a lot of people are confusing. And
the goal of yoga is achieved by āṇmā-vichāra, because by āṇmā-vichāra, the thoughts are automatically curbed, because if there's no one to attend, thoughts cannot rise without us attending to them. They can't just arise with. But where do thoughts arise? They arise in our awareness. So if we refuse to direct our awareness towards them, they will automatically subside. So the goal of yoga is achieved by āṇmā-vichāra, but the goal of āṇmā-vichāra is not achieved by yoga. That is the important thing to understand.
Exactly. That's well said.
I'll mention one other very sad thing about Advaita, because over the years, that is, most Advaitins don't understand the practical implications. They study all these texts. They study the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, and they study various commentaries on them and various other texts, but they fail to understand what is the practical implication of all these teachings. So most classical Advaitins don't have a clear idea what is meant by Atma-vichara. The word vichara is used there, but they take vichara to mean a mental exercise, discriminating drisya viveka. That is distinguishing the seer from the seen as a mental exercise, not in a practical way, but in a mental exercise, understanding the difference between the seer and the seen, and analyzing the 5 states. All these various prakriyas, they take these prakriyas to be vichara. These prakriyas or methodologies or these are just different ways of analyzing our experience in order to understand what we are not and what we are. What we are not is this body consisting of 5 sheaths. What we are is awareness. A little bit of discrimination, a little bit of conceptual analysis is necessary to understand this. But this is not vichara. This is the foundation of vichara, because if we don't understand what we are not, we won't be, if we're told to attend to ourselves and we take ourselves to be the body or take ourselves to be the mind, we'll be attending to something other than what we actually are. So our aim is to attend to what we actually are. What we actually are is just awareness. It's just that fundamental awareness I am, the pure awareness I am. That is what we need to attend to. But most classical Advaitins fail to understand this. So you will often hear those who give lectures on classical Advaita, they will often say, we don't agree with the philosophy of yoga, but the practices of yoga are very useful. Because they don't understand what the practice of Advaita is. The practice of Advaita, it's clear in the word itself. Advaita means not two, not one without a second. So what practice can there be that does not involve two? In any practice, you've got a meditator or someone doing whatever the practice may be, you've got a doer of that practice. In the case of meditation, you have a choice. Either you meditate on something other than yourself. If you meditate on something other than yourself, you've got two. All the yoga practices are meditating on something other than themselves, or on the breath, or on something other than themselves. Either we meditate on something other than ourselves. If we don't meditate on something other than ourselves, what's the only alternative? To meditate on ourselves. If we meditate on ourselves, there's no two there. Because the one who's meditating and what is meditated upon are one and the same. So Atma-vichara, self-attentiveness, as taught by Bhagavan, alone is the correct practice of Advaita. But most classical Advaitins fail to understand this. Though they're very familiar with the word vichara, they don't even understand what the word vichara means. Bhagavan has, in one verse in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan has summarized the practical implication of the whole of Vedanta, taking just 3 words from Vedanta. One of the Mahavakyas, tat tvam asi. In Tamil, it's not even 3 words. In Tamil, it's just 2 words, adu ni. So in verse 32 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, what Bhagavan says is, this is a very important verse, because in this is Bhagavan's commentary, we can say. All that is in order to be a Vedanta Acharya, it is usually said that you have to write commentary on the Prasthanatraya. In order to establish your interpretation of Vedanta as the correct interpretation, You have to, or at least to argue that it's the correct interpretation, whether others agree with you or not is another matter. You have to write commentaries on the Prasthanatraya. That means on the Upanishads, at least the 10 principal Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavan hasn't written commentaries on these, but he's written commentary. This one verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is Bhagavan's commentary on one of the Mahavakyas, Tattvamasi, which is the essence of Vedanta. And he, from this Mahavakya, Bhagavan points out in this verse what we should understand. He says, Aduni endru ammaregal artiduvum. When that means when the Vedas proclaim that is you, taṇṇai edu endru tan tendu iradu. Instead of oneself being knowing oneself as what? Adunan idu andru endru ennal urin in mayinal. Thinking I am I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength. Endrum aduve taṇṇai amavadal, because that alone is always seated as oneself. So Bhagavan puts this in a very, this is the whole of Vedanta. Bhagavan, well, the practical implication of the whole of Vedanta, Bhagavan has packed into this verse. The most important part of this verse is the first first 1 3/4 lines. That is, when the Vedas proclaim that is you, instead of oneself knowing being oneself as what? What does he imply by this? What he implies by this is that as soon as we hear the Vedas say that is you, what should our response be? Our response should be to investigate, oh, if I am that, then what am I? So we should investigate what am I. By investigating what am I, we should know what we actually are. And by knowing what we actually are, we will thereby be what we actually are, because we cannot know what we actually are without being what we actually are. So that is what, that first 1 3/4 lines, that is the whole of that Bhagavan's commentary on the whole of Vedanta is there. What is the implication of Tattvamasi is that we should investigate what am I, and thereby know and be what we actually are. But instead of doing so, the classical Advaitins, they go on thinking, I am that. I am Brahman, I'm not this body, I'm not the... They go on with all their prakriyas. They're analyzing the Drisya Viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen, analyzing the 3 states, and distinguishing what is permanent from what is impermanent, what is changing from unchanging. All these are called prakriyas. That is what Bhagavan summarizes all these prakriyas as thinking I am that, not this. Because that's what the prakriyas are all meant to make us understand. But what we actually are is not this body or mind or anything. What we are is only that which shines in our heart as I. Because that alone is always seated as oneself. So the implication of the Mahavakya, that is you, that there refers to Brahman. So why do the Upanishads, why do the Vedas say that the Upanishads are part of the Vedas? So why do the Vedas tell us that Brahman is, that you are yourself a Brahman, that is you, or actually Tattvamasi means that you are. But in Tamil it's Aduni, which means that is you, or you are that. You can take it either way, but it all amounts to the same. But the whole point of Mahavakya is, till now we have been looking for Brahman or God or happiness or knowledge or whatever we're looking for it outside ourselves. Because whatever we're looking for seems to be lacking in ourselves. So we look for it outside ourselves. I seem to be not happy enough, so I look for... So since I'm not happy enough, it seems to me that happiness is not in me. Therefore, I must look outside to find happiness. And I'm a very small creature. God is very big, so God must be something outside of me. So the natural tendency of the mind is to look for anything, to look for things outside ourselves, whether it's Brahman or God or whatever it is. We look for it outside ourselves. So the whole point of the Mahavakyas, which proclaim you are that, is to turn our attention away from outside, looking for that outside. Since if I am that, then what am I? We need to, there's no that other than me. So I need to know, who am I? I need to investigate me, not investigate anything else. But there are historic reasons why classical Advaita hasn't emphasized this, because Advaita was a philosophy that existed before Shankara. Shankara had a divine mission to broaden the appeal of Advaita by making it acceptable to a broader audience. So Shankara often had to dilute the deeper teachings of Advaita. So it is often, even the classical Advaitins often observe that the Advaita of Shankara's Paramaguru, Gaudapada, was more radical than the Advaita of Shankara. Even classical Advaitins admit that. The reason is Shankara experience is exactly the same as Gaudapada's experience, but Gaudapada wasn't trying to popularize or broaden the appeal of Vedanta or of Advaita, whereas Shankara had that mission, that divine mission, to broaden the appeal of Advaita. So in order to broaden the appeal of Advaita, he had to answer so many objections. I haven't studied the commentaries of Shankara, but if you study the commentaries of Shankara on the Upanishads or the Brahma Sutra or the Bhagavad Gita, he keeps on bringing up Purvapaksha. Purvapaksha means contrary arguments. So he keeps on raising arguments that others can raise against Advaita in order to defend Advaita against those arguments. But so he goes into very, very elaborate explanations which are meant for others. And some of the explanations he gives are not actually even the correct explanation. For example, in his commentaries, he says that though again, I haven't read this, this is what I've heard said, so don't quote me on this, but this is what I believe from what I've heard. He says that though Agamya and Prarabdha are destroyed by Jnana, Agamya and Sanchita are destroyed by Jnana, Prarabdha does remain for the duration of the life of the body of the Jiva Mukta. Bhagavan has written a reply to that in a later verse of Anubandham. Bhagavan says, I think I'll get that verse. It's, I think, 30, one of the early verse.
Well, something like when the husband dies, all the three wives are
going to exactly. I'll just get the verse number. It's
so when the ego dies,
33.
All the three karmas will die.
Yeah.
Right?
But what he says there is, but the wording is important. So I'll get the actual wording. 33. Yeah. What Bhagavan says here is Sanchita agamyangal saravam jnaniku vinjam ennal vetra kelviku vilambum sol am. What he says is that what that means is saying Sanchita and Agamya do not adhere to the jnani, Prarabdha does remain, is a statement said to the question of others. So Bhagavan is explaining here why Shankara said like that. It's to the questions of others. Because Shankara was answering the objections raised by others, he often had to give diluted explanations in order, if he had given more radical explanations, if he had said, like Bhagavan says in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. If Shankara had said like that, nobody would have come to, I mean, very, very few people would have been attracted to Advaita. So Shankara had to dilute Advaita in many ways in order to appeal, to broaden the appeal. So as Bhagavan says here, what he said in his commentaries about this is a statement said to the question of others. What does Bhagavan mean by others? Vetra. What he means by others is those who are not coming to this path of going within, of āṇmā-v-āha, the true path of āṇmā-vichara. Then Bhagavan explains why this is not this explanation cannot be a correct explanation. Just as the husband dying, a wife does not remain unwidowed, but doer dying, all the three karmas will cease. That is what he means by that is, if a husband has 3 wives and passes away, all 3 wives become widows. You can't have one wife who remains unwidowed. They're all 3 of them are widowed. Likewise, when ego, the doer, dies, all the 3 karmas will cease. Because ego is not only the doer, it's also the experiencer. So when ego is absent, who is there remaining to experience the prarabdha? The reason Shankara said prarabdha remains, because people take the jnani to be the body, and obviously for the body there seems to be a prarabdha. So Shankara concedes, yes, prarabdha does remain for the duration of the body. But according to Bhagavan, the body is not the jnani. The jnani is jnana itself. So Bhagavan is not criticizing Shankara here. He's explaining why Shankara said that. He had to say that to the questions of others. Bhagavan also often gave diluted answers, because when people weren't able to understand deeper answers, he had to give you a diluted answer, like those 3 sentences that were later added in the 8th paragraph of Nāṇmā, about though the mind subsides in sleep, the prana does not subside. That is a diluted answer. That's not the correct teachings of Bhagavan, but even Bhagavan gave that answer to the questions of others. In the same way, Shankara gave answer to the questions of others. So because Shankara was giving teachings for the benefit of others, he wrote a whole work explaining Tattvamasi. The work is called Vakya Vritti. And basically what he's doing in that verse, he's analyzing what is meant by that, what is meant by you, how that is you and you are that. But all these is answers to the objections of others. The simple truth is, when we are told you are that, if I am that, then obviously, if I am Brahman, then obviously I'm not this person I take myself to be. Obviously, I'm not this body. So who am I? We should have once take to self-investigation that those 3 words, Tattvamasi, should be enough to turn our attention back to ourselves. If we are mature aspirant, it's only for the sake of others that all this analysis is necessary. So because Shankara has gone in, has given elaborate explanations for the benefit of others, people fail to understand, and because everyone takes Shankara to be the foremost exponent of Advaita, people fail to understand that most of his explanations were given to the answers of others. They're not necessary for a spiritual aspirant. All that is necessary for a spiritual aspirant is this Mahavakya, you are that. If a mature aspirant will understand when they're told you are that, or if I am that, then what am I? And they'll turn their attention back within to investigate who am I. So a lot of what Shankara wrote is for the benefit of others, not for the benefit of spiritual aspirant. That's why in Bhagavan's when Bhagavan translated Vivekachudamani into Tamil prose, in his Avatarike or introduction, he wrote that though Shankara wrote all these Prasthanatraya, they are not useful for the real spiritual aspirant. So he condensed it all in this work, Vivekachudamani. I'm not sure if I can. That is Bhagavan. Most of this introduction Bhagavan wrote on the introduction to Vivekananda, most of it is one long sentence. So I probably can't translate it here. But he does, the gist of it towards the end, Bhagavan says, but though he wrote all these Prasthanatreya Bhāsha, this is not useful for the real spiritual aspirant. So he's given the essence of it all in this Vivekananda. But Bhagavan has simplified things far more than Vivekananda. Bhagavan has simplified everything in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Thank you, Michael.
Because Bhagavan's teachings are for spiritual aspirants. Shankara, though Shankara, that is, it's the same Bhagavan who appeared in the form of Shankara. So we're not saying anything against Shankara, but the mission that particular manifestation of Bhagavan in the form of Shankara, it had a particular mission to broaden the appeal of Advaita in order to bring in more genuine spiritual aspirants. Maybe so the majority of people are not yet ready for this spirit, for Advaita, but in order to draw people closer to the heart of Advaita, Shankaran had to broaden the appeal of it. But it's up to each individual how deep we go. If we want to go deep in Advaita, we need to go into the actual practice of Advaita. The practice of Advaita can only be self-attentiveness, because only in self-attentiveness you have one without a second. You've got no second there. Tameva Advaityam in self-attentiveness. So to emphasize what is the practical implication of all of Vedanta, that is Bhagavan's mission. That's why Bhagavan didn't write commentaries on the Prasthanatreya. He just wrote this simple verse giving what is the practical implication of this simple verse. I'm referring to verse 32 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. In that verse, he gives us the practical implication of the whole of Vedanta, because all of Vedanta is summarized in these Mahavakyas. And what is the practical implication of that? He gives us in this verse 32 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Right.
Sorry, I've spoken for a very long time today, so maybe we should try and... Sorry.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up in a couple of questions more.
Yeah.
So, of course, and so I'm sorry, coming back to Sudha's question. So, Sudha, do you want to have a follow-up question to this? Are you here, Sudha?
Okay. If she's not, I can just add one more thing, because she may listen to this afterwards. That is, if we feel that we need something, an aid to this practice of self-investigation, rather than taking to any other practice, the most effective aid and support in this practice is Bhagavan's teachings. By often reading and thinking carefully about Bhagavan's teachings are always directing our attention back towards ourselves. They're always encouraging us to attend to ourselves. So the best aid to putting Bhagavan's teachings into practice is studying Bhagavan's teachings. In other words, Sravana and Manana of our Guru's teachings, Sravana literally means hearing, but it means attentively reading or hearing Bhagavan's teaching, paying close attention to what he says. That's Sravana. Manana is thinking about it carefully, making sense of it, trying to understand what he's saying. These are the greatest aid to the practice, which is called what is called nididhyasana. Nididhyasana means deep contemplation. In this context, it means contemplation on ourselves. In other words, āṇmā-vichāra. So that's the greatest aid. So other than Bhagavan's teachings, we don't need any other aid. If we continuously study Bhagavan's original writings, Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadeshundya, Nāna, āṇmā-v-āha, and such works, these will be constantly encouraging us to turn back within. And that is far greater help than trying to do some other type of meditation, which is not at all necessary. It has no real connection with this practice of āṇmā-vichāra, no connection at all.
for the goal we are pursuing.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine for those who want to do these things. We're not
exactly
objecting
right.
to
Otherwise, the other ones want to do that. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, why there are so many different spiritual paths, so many different religions, so many different philosophies? Because they appeal to different minds.
Right.
But if we are truly attracted to Bhagavan and his teachings, nothing else is necessary. We are supremely fortunate if we are attracted to Bhagavan, because this is the ultimate. But we're not here to put down others or to say, to comment on others. It's just not for us.
Right. And that's what I think responded to Sudha too. I mean, if others want to practice something else, we're fine. But now that we've been attracted to Bhagavan, that's what Michael is recommending for us.
Yeah.
Self-investigation
is not what Michael's recommending, it's what Bhagavan's recommending.
Exactly what Bhagavan is recommending, right? So does that answer your question, Sandy? I think his question was, didn't Bhagavan recommend many paths? So,
yes, it did.
Bhagavan didn't recommend many paths. In Upadesha Undiyā, Bhagavan has talked about all the different practices, but if you pay close attention, if you do real Sravana of Upadesha Undiyā, it's clear what Bhagavan is doing. In verse 3, he says, in verse 2, he says, action will not give liberation. Then in verse 3, he says, action that is done without desire for the fruit, in other words, nishkarmiya karma, done for God, that means done for the love of God, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. And then from verse 4 onwards, he begins to talk about whatever nishkarmiya karmas we can do for the love of God. There are 3 types of karmas we can do for the love of God. There's actions of body, actions of mind, actions of speech, actions of mind. Actions of body that we do for the love of God are called puja. Actions of speech that we do for the love of God are called japa. And actions of mind that we do for the love of God are called dhyana. So he then devotes one verse to each of these. And he shows how each one is more effective than the other one. That is, more effective than puja is japa, more effective than japa is dhyana. He's not recommending these. He's just showing the relative efficacy of each of these for purifying the mind. And what's the result of purifying the mind? When the mind is purified, it will show the way to liberation. What does that mean by that? When the mind is purified, but it gains clarity, and the clear mind will understand that karma is not the way to liberation. If karma is not the way to liberation, karma means action. So doing is not the way to liberation. Then what can I do to get liberation? Stop doing, just be. Being is the way to liberation. So in verse, after dealing with this path of nishkarmiya karma, which Bhagavan doesn't take nishkarmiya karma to be a separate path, the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti is the path of karma, up to verse 7. That is the highest karma you can do, is meditating on God with love. But he then in verse 8, he switches it. He says, rather than āṇmā-v-āha, meditating on God as something other than oneself, meditate āṇmā-v-āha, that is meditating on him as not other than oneself, with the understanding he is I, that is a ṇēkamām, that is the best among all. So what he's referring to in verse 8 is āṇmā-vichāra. When we understand that God isn't something outside, God is what is shining in our heart as I, what should we meditate on? We should meditate only on I. And so meditating on I, that is what he means by āṇmā-v-āha, meditating on nothing other than I, that is best of all. And then in the next verse, verse 9, he says, by the strength of such meditation, being in sat-bhava, the state of being, which transcends bhavana, that transcends all mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. So this path of jnana is the culmination of the path of bhakti and jnana are not 2 separate paths. The early part of the path of bhakti is the karma path. The later stage of the path of bhakti is the jnana path. When we come to meditate on God as us, nothing other than ourselves, that is the path of jnana. That is the pinnacle of the path of yoga, of bhakti, because that leads to parabhakti, the state of just being as we actually are. The state of being as we actually are is the state of complete surrender. And then in the next, he summarized it all in verse 10 by saying, being having subsided in the place from which we rose, that is karma and bhakti and yoga and jnana. Then he deals with the path of yoga briefly in verses 11, 12, 13, 14, and then summarizes it in 15. Again, he shows path of yoga by itself will lead only to manolaya. In order to achieve manonasa, the yogi must send the mind on the path of self-investigation. In other words, he must turn his mind back within to investigate who am I. Then only will the mind die. And for that great yogi whose mind has died, there's nothing further to do. So though Bhagavan mentions the other paths, he's not recommending them. He's just showing their relative efficacy, and he's showing that they're beneficial only to the extent to which they lead to this ultimate path of Atma-vichara. But if someone comes to Bhagavan, this vichara is too difficult for me, can I do dhyana? Bhagavan say, yes, you can do dhyana, very good. No, what's better than dhyana? And after some time, Bhagavan himself said this. If they come to me if they ask like this, then next time they'll come to me and say, oh, this dhyana is very difficult. Can I do japa instead? And then I'll have to say, yes, japa is very good. What's better than japa? You do japa. And then after some time they'll come to me, oh, this japa is very difficult because my mind keeps on wandering. Can I do puja instead? And then I had to say, yes, do puja. And then after some time, I say, this puja is very difficult. Can I do pranayama? Because my mind's wandering even when I'm doing puja. Can I do pranayama instead? Okay, yes, you do pranayama. But what can Bhagavan do? If they say that this is too difficult for them, he has to let them do whatever they want to do.
That doesn't mean he's recommending it.
It doesn't mean he's recommending.
Thank you, Michael. So, Malcolm, do you want to ask your question?
The one I put on the chat?
Right.
Yes, I appreciated, Michael, I appreciated your distinguishing the difference between manolaya and manonasa. My question was, how do we differentiate vichara according to the goal of manolaya or manonasa, or do we differentiate the use of vichara?
That is, manolaya is the subsidence of mind brought about by any means other than Atma-vichara.
Oh, okay.
Because if the mind subsides by any means other than Atma-vichara, it will rise again, because it's not destroyed. Only Atma-vichara can destroy the mind. So if you're practicing Atma-vichara, you cannot subside in laya. Sometimes when practicing Atma-vichara, you may fall asleep. Sleep is laya, but it's not Atma-vichara that has caused you to fall into sleep. It's because you've lost a hold on your self-attentiveness that you fall asleep. So if we hold on to self-attentiveness, we cannot subside in manolaya. If we hold on to self-attentiveness firmly enough, the mind will subside. The mind, that is what happens when, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, the mind thereby subsides. If we attend to ourselves 100%, in other words, if we turn 180 degrees away from other things, back towards ourselves, as soon as we turn 180 degrees, we become aware of ourself alone. We cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever. As soon as we're aware of ourself alone, being aware of ourself alone is pure awareness, because pure awareness is awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. So as soon as we are aware of ourselves alone, we are aware of ourselves as pure awareness. As soon as we're aware of ourselves as pure awareness, ego is thereby destroyed, because ego is the false awareness, I am this body. The impure awareness, the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. That can be destroyed only by the correct awareness of ourself. The correct awareness of ourself is pure awareness. So,
but Atma-vichara,
if you follow Atma-vichara far enough, you as ego experience yourself as pure awareness. But ego, as soon as ego experiences itself as pure awareness, it ceases to be ego and remains as pure awareness.
But it doesn't always remain when we're meditating.
Because we don't go deep enough. We don't go deep enough.
Right. So
but
it's not.
So long as we're holding on to self-attentiveness, we are not subsiding in laya. We can subside in laya only when we lose our hold on self-attentiveness. When we are following this path of āṇmā-vichāra, there are two ways in which our attention can be diverted away from ourselves. The diversion of our attention away from ourselves is what is called pramāda. That's inattentiveness or self-negligence. That can happen in one of two ways. Either we get distracted by thoughts, that's by things other than ourselves, or we subside in sleep. This is why this path of vichara is sometimes described as a razor's edge, because it's like walking a tightrope. We shouldn't fall this way, we shouldn't fall that way. But this tightrope is a razor-sharp tightrope. It's such a fine line to remain carefully balanced between thought and sleep. In other words, between mental activity and laya. We need to remain balanced in between. That is a deeper meaning of the word samadhi. It's the state in which the mind, is in a state of samatvam, of balance, equilibrium. So we are to remain balanced. We shouldn't get diverted by thoughts. We shouldn't succumb to sleep. We have to remain between the two.
So it's not a differentiation. It's the same process, just taken at a deeper level, continued.
Yes, but in yoga, their aim is to go into laya. Our path, our aim is to avoid laya, to hold on to self-attentiveness. Okay. Inevitably, we'll fall asleep sooner or later because the mind needs its rest. So long as the mind is active, it needs rest. Right. So there's no wrong in sleeping. We shouldn't be trying to avoid sleep. But when we are practicing, we're trying to avoid falling asleep. If we find sleep is overpowering, as Sadhu Om said, okay, if you're feeling sleepy, sleep. When you wake up, continue.
And avoiding thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so long as we're practicing, we're trying to avoid both thought and sleep.
Right. Okay.
But when sleep overpowers us, then sleep and return to the practice when you wake up. Because then your mind will be fresh again and you'll be able to go deeper.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So Anu, you are still here?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you had a question. Actually, I should have asked you first because your question was last week. So go ahead and ask Michael about the I am I question that you had, and it also occurs in this verse. So it's a good time to ask.
Yeah. So, Namaskar, Michael. So the question I had last time was, is I am I like non, you explained it as I am I. And,
yes.
I understand that, but is non really, is it a good enough translation? Like, is I am I? Because nan in Tamil it's a hard one to translate. That's what I was trying to say.
How would you translate nānidu?
Nānidu. Yeah, like I get what you're saying. I am I is, yes. In English, that's what I would paraphrase it. But
yeah, that is Bhagavan often used to contrast nānidu with nan. Nānidu means I am this. That is ego. Nan is I am I. That is what we actually are.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like what you explained, the way you explained it today. So yeah, thanks.
How would you translate nana? Nana literally means I who. Do we put I hyphen who? No, we say who. We say I am who or who am I?
Right. Yeah.
The am is understood there. Just like am is understood in nana, am is understood in nan.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So Satya Chilikuri. You there?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
have a comment from my own personal experience. I can say practicing pranayama has been extremely helpful in preconditioning for meditation or dhyana or āṇmā-vichara, either of them. It is my own practical experience and it is undeniable.
Okay, but
if you have an iron rod, if you want to shape it to your desired shape, you have to heat it so that it becomes malleable. You have to make it red hot so that it becomes malleable. Similarly, in order to practice dhyana or āṇmā-vichara, preconditioning by practicing pranayama and developing the absorption of mind has been extremely useful. It is from my own practical experience, and there is a lot of objective evidence proven by multiple people and multiple experiments. So it is beyond doubt.
Okay.
The second question.
Can I just comment on that? Can I just explain that? Because it's a good point. It's a good point you're making there. This is why so many different paths are there, because for different people, different types of practices are appropriate. So why the path of yoga is there? We're not saying that yoga is useless, but it is suitable for certain type of people. But however far you go in the path of yoga, in order to achieve a final goal, which is mano-nāsa, as Bhagavan says in verse 14 of Upadesha, only when the mind is sent on that investigating path will its form die. So if our aim is the annihilation of mind, the mano-nāsa, yoga is not sufficient. It maybe for some people, it prepares the mind for this path. Not for everyone. For many people, the path of bhakti is a more suitable preparation. But for certain type of minds, this path of yoga may be a more suitable preparation. But these are all only preparations. So you yourself say that this is very useful for coming to this path. So, but now you have come to this path, these are, whatever we practice, we are all in the past, we must all have practiced some other practices, whether bhakti or yoga, we must have practiced these things. Not everyone will have practiced yoga, not everyone will have practiced bhakti, but we must all have practiced one or other of these. But otherwise, we wouldn't have been drawn to this path. Now we've been drawn to this path. That means those old practices have served their purpose. We can now leave them behind and take to this ultimate practice, which is the practice of self-investigation, because this is the only means to destroy the mind, as Bhagavan made very, very clear. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, there's a little follow-up on that one, because most of the confusion is related to how you define mano-nāsa, because has been a lot of misunderstanding behind the phrase mano-nāsa, because it is not a destruction of mind as people presume, that as if mind has a physical structure. It is not, mind is not physical structure, it is a group of thoughts is called mind. And second, what are you achieving by practicing self-investigation? What's the goal? What is it changing? Basically, if the goal is to change the concept of what is I, what is ego, then you get rid of the ignorance, thereby you are destroying the false assumption or false thought that I am this body or I am this panchakosha or whatever false impression we may have. So that is what I assume is the right understanding of mano-nāsa. It is not a physical destruction of any part. And by mano-nāsa, it does not divide us from having interaction with the external world or understanding others. communicating with others?
Okay, you're touching on a big subject here. Firstly, mano nāsa means mano nāsa. That it's very, very clear what the term means. Nāsa means annihilation, destruction. The root of the mind is ego. Only when ego is destroyed is the mind destroyed. Because without ego, there can be no mind. Because ego is the subject, but all the other thoughts of the mind are objects. Objects exist only in the view of the subject. Bhagavan is very, very clear in the final verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. He concludes very, very clearly what is liberation. What he says is, in Tamil he says, Uruvum aruvum uruvaruvum mundram urum mukti enil urepan. Uruvum aruvum uruvaruvum ayum ahande uru aridal mukti una. What that means is, I'll read it, a literal meaning, and I'll explain it. If it is said that the liberation one will experience is three, form, formless, form, formless, I will say the ego form, which distinguishes form, formless, form, formless, being destroyed is liberation. What he means by that is, if it is said that liberate the mukti, that one will experience or one will attain, is of three kinds: with form, without form, or either with form or without form. That is a state in which one can alternate back and forth between being a form and being formless. I will say only destruction of the ego form, in other words, the form-bound ego, which distinguishes these three kinds of liberation, with form, without form, with or without form, is liberation. So here Bhagavan states clearly that liberation is destruction of ego. And he begins Aksharam-Malai, that is, this is the end of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. He begins Aksharam-Malai, the very first verse, he says, Arunachala mena ahame nene pava ahate verarupai Arunachala. Arunachala, you, verarupai means you destroy the root. You destroy it, root and branch, as it were. In other words, you eradicate ego of those who meditate on you in the heart, those who meditate in the heart, but Arunachala is I. Or who meditate in the heart on Arunachala as I, you destroy their ego. So destruction of ego is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Without ego, as he says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, ahande undayin anatum undahum, ahande indrel indru anatum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yavirndiḍu, ego itself is everything. Adalal yadu idayam nadale overdal yavirndiḍu. Therefore, know that investigating what this is giving up everything. What this is means what this ego is. If we investigate ego, ego will cease to exist. When ego ceases to exist, everything else will cease to exist, because everything else exists only in the view of ego. Then where is there any world to interact with? Who is there to interact with the world? As Bhagavan said, it's only in the view of the ajnani, but the jnani seems to be a person and seems to interact with the world. But according to the experience of the jnani, Bhagavan said, jnaname jnani, jnana alone is the jnani. Many classical Advaitins nowadays will tell you mano nāsa doesn't really mean mano nāsa. They give some diluted explanation. But from Bhagavan's teachings, it is clear that mano nāsa means mano nāsa. Annihilation. Mano nāsa means annihilation of the mind. Annihilation means complete and utter destruction of mind. And when mind is, even to say it's destruction of mind, Bhagavan goes even one step further than that. In verse 17 of Upadeshandya, he says, Manatin uruvei maravadu chava manamenum ondrile undi para. Markam nērakam idundi para. And in Sanskrit, he says, Manasam tu kim magane krite neva manasam magama javat. When investigation is done, what the mind actually is there is no mind at all. So what is called manonasa is just the recognition that mind has never existed at all. If mind had existed at one time, then it can come back again. But the truth is, mind never existed. So destruction of the mind is like if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake. If you look carefully at the snake, you can say, and if you look carefully enough at the snake, you'll see it's just a rope. Metaphorically, you can say that is destruction of the snake. The snake has been killed. Likewise with the mind. If we look at the mind carefully enough, we'll see what seems to be the mind, what the mind actually is only pure awareness. So there's no such thing as mind other than pure awareness. And in the view of pure awareness, there's nothing other than pure awareness. So Bhagavan is very clear.
I understand what you said is right, but there is one aspect of this discussion that has been confusing for a long time for me, but finally I got the real answer. I think when I say or someone says that Ramana Maharshi was teaching physically or interacting with the public, it is the transactional reality. It is a relative reality. Exactly. It is not absolute reality. When you say if it is absolute reality, there is no mind. But we are saying that we are controlling the mind. So we are confusing or navigating between absolute reality and relative reality and giving different versions of the same
yes. We need to clearly distinguish the two. Then we can talk. But often when we talk about Bhagavan, we're talking about the person who lived for 54 years in Tiruvannamalai, gave us these teachings. But that person exists only in our view. What was shining through that person, what the source from which Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu and all these works came, is what was shining through that person. That is Brahman. That is jnana itself. So Bhagavan is nothing but jnana. Bhagavan is jnana swarupa. He's pure awareness, nothing other than awareness. Bhagavan himself often used to say, jnaname jnani. That means jnana alone is the jnani. Jnana means pure awareness. So what can know pure awareness? Only pure awareness can know pure awareness. So the jnani cannot be anything other than pure awareness. That is why it said in the Upanishad, the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. It's not actually a matter of becoming. When we know Brahman, we know that we ourselves are Brahman, but we were never anything other than Brahman. So there never was any such thing as mind or ego. What exists is ekam eva advaityam, one only without a second.
Agree, it is simple revelation.
Sorry?
It is simple revelation of a fact.
It is very simple. But problem is, for most of us, it's too simple because our minds are too complicated. So we're not ready to accept the simplicity. If we accept the simplicity, the simple teaching of Advaita is so simple. No commentaries are necessary. Tattvamasi, know yourself. That's all there is to it. It's so simple. Why all these commentaries are necessary? To slowly bring people round to understanding this, to jettisoning the old ideas and come to the simple understanding. But what actually exists, yatātamai uڵḷadu āṇmā-sarūpam andre, as Bhagavan says in the 7th paragraph of Nāna, what actually exists is only āṇmā-sarūpa. āṇmā-sarūpa means the real nature of ourself as we actually are. So we alone are what actually exists.
Thank you very much.
So there never was any ego, never was any mind, never was any body, never was any world. So the ultimate truth, the paramartika satya, is ajata.
No creation.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Center.